Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast. This is the Group of Five Deep Dive. I'm your host, Mike Calabrese, and the Ed Oliver to my Mackenzie Milton, of course, referring to Mike Ianniello, joining me for this ride, and a special guest here for the AAC conference preview. We got Stuckey on board, and we got a lot of good teams at the top of this conference to discuss, some teams with New Year's Six Bowl aspirations. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it. Let's start with the belle of the ball last year. Cincy punches their ticket as a G5 team to the college football playoff. Their win total coming to 2022, 9.5, plus 200 to win the AAC. SP plus projections on offense, 18th, 19th on defense. So, very balanced there at the top. A lot to like, even though Desmond Ridder is now off to the NFL. They have 3 returning all-conference offensive linemen, 5 starters return in total on the O-line. Evan Prater or Ben Bryant at quarterback, Prater being the highest rated recruit in program history. Corey Kiner coming in from LSU to fill in that Jerome Ford void. They had plucked him out of Alabama. He was clearly a difference maker. Kiner can be that kind of runner for the Bearcats this year. 7 new starters on defense led by Mike Tressel. But then we get into the schedule and things get, interesting. I think this number is probably priced at 9.5 when you consider they're at Arkansas. They're at Miami of Ohio, who could be, vying for a MAC championship this year. They blew the doors off the Red Hawks last year, but they got to go to Oxford. They also get Indiana at home. And then when you look at their schedule across the AAC, at SMU, at Central Florida, but they do avoid Houston. So I'll start with you, Ianniello. What are your thoughts on Cincy this year? Do you think this number at 9.5 is just too high to play in either direction?
I think it's priced pretty fairly. I don't really have any action either way, as you mentioned. I still think they'll be good. They've recruited well. Luke Fickell's, the best G5 coach going, one of the best in the entire country. But you mentioned it. There's just too many losses for me to want to invest in this team. They lost 7 all-conference defenders, 9 players drafted, the most ever from a G5 team. Ben Bryant, assuming he does win the job, at least has the advantage of he was in that system for 3 years backing up Desmond Ridder. So he's not a completely new quarterback, which I do like. You mentioned the O-line, which I love. But to me, there's just too much turnover, especially on defense, for me to really want to invest in this team at that price.
Stuckey, what are your thoughts on UC here trying to rekindle the magic once again and starting a season against an SEC sleeper in Arkansas, a team that clearly wants to keep their positive momentum going? Cincinnati's not going to sneak up on anybody. What are your thoughts on the Bearcats?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about the top 3 teams in this conference, Houston, Cincy, UCF, just to illustrate how close they are in the media poll, which obviously can be a little off from power ratings. But Houston, 243 total votes, Cincy, 242, and then UCF, 225. Houston and UCF got 7 first-place votes, and Cincy got 10. So Houston actually was the media preseason favorite by 1 vote. Yeah, I mean, look, it'll be interesting to see who becomes the quarterback here. Both were backups to Ridder in the past in different seasons. Ben Bryant actually left, so that's a fun little nugget. But I don't really think that Ridder's that big of a loss or Ford. And the offensive line should be great. I am worried about the receivers, but we mentioned the defense, and I just don't think that we can really account for how big of a loss their guys in their secondary are. I mean, they had 3 get drafted in their first 4 rounds. Kobe Bryant won the Jim Thorpe went in the 4th. They had a safety go in the second round. And then, of course, Sauce Gardner in the first round, who, has been, I think, the best cornerback in college football the past few seasons. 1,100 snaps. He had 9 interceptions, allowed 0 touchdowns in his career. I mean, as the boundary corner, what he allowed that defense to do, and when you have 3 NFL defensive backs, I just don't think that we are anticipating the drop-off in the entire defense, right? Like, hey, we go from NFL corners to, they got Arquan Bush there and a safety back, but then what happens in the front 7? They lost some guys there too. So I think the defense takes a significant step back just when you have a guy who can just say, tell Gardner, go take the boundary side of the field. And then no team's even going to throw there the entire game. Makes your defense a lot easier. So I think Colin has like a touchdown difference between Houston and Cincy. I don't see it being that big of a gap. I think Houston, UCF, and Cincy are pretty close. And if you look at the schedule, like who plays who where, yes, Cincy does avoid Houston. But as we mentioned, if we say let's throw a 4th team in here as a top 4 with SMU, Cincy has 2 road games against the top 4. Houston only has one road game. They only play one of the top 4 teams, and that's SMU. And then UCF plays 2, but they play both at home. So from a scheduling point of view, from the top 3 teams, I think Cincy's at a disadvantage. UCF, really tough place to play. No, I've seen no value. I think the win total is about right. I would lean under, but not enough to play it. But I do think the defense is going to take a bigger step back than a lot of people are thinking. I know they're recruiting well, but you just can't underestimate the impact of losing those guys in the secondary to the NFL.
I'll also add in Cincinnati messed around a few times last year, and they were in games that they really shouldn't have been in late in the third quarter and fourth quarter. And I think a lot of that has to do with Fickell just being more of a conservative coach. So does he take the governor off of this offense, let Gino Guidugli open it up a little bit so they can win some higher scoring games? That's yet to be seen. I think 9.5 is too rich for my blood. If I were to play it, I'd play under based on their schedule. But let's get into some of these other challengers, because as Stuckey acutely, pointed out, these teams are neck and neck, and there's a lot to like in the top 4. The second team here being Houston, their win total is set at 9, minus 120 if you go with the under on the win total, 2-1 as well to win the AAC. SP plus, according to Bill Conley, 46th rated offense, 42nd rated defense. For me, I would be all in buy if Alden McCaskill did not get hurt. The AAC Rookie of the Year out for the year. He gave them an extra home run threat offensively. Not that the cupboard's bare by any stretch. Clayton Tune back. Tank Dell was electric down the stretch, including a great bowl game against Auburn. Matthew Golden comes in, one of the highest rated recruits, probably going back to the SWAC days for Houston. He's an early enrollee at wide receiver. There's tons of buzz about him. And then on the defensive side of the ball, $1 million man, Doug Belk at defensive coordinator. He's put together a unit that they're calling themselves Sac Avenue, Chidozie, Nwankwo, Parrish, D'Anthony Jones, Nelson Caesar. I like any team that can generate pressure just with 4 or 5 guys rushing the passer. They can do that. But there is a really tricky opening slate. They got to go to what could be a hornet's nest playing at UTSA at the Alamo Dome. And then the very next week, talk about a team with positive momentum at Texas Tech. That's going to be a wild game, an old SWAC rivalry renewed. After that, no Cincy, no UCF at SMU. But I don't know. I think I'm more interested to play them at plus, at plus 200, plus 225, depending on the book, to win the AAC as opposed to the win total. I'll go first to you, Stuckey, on this one. What are your thoughts on the Cougs here? And do you have any kind of concerns about this offense without that home run threat at running back?
No, I really like this offense. The offensive line, there are some questions there, but they're loaded at receiver. Dell, you mentioned, Tune is back and extremely experienced. I don't think the running back is as big of a loss as you're making, but it is a loss. The defense, look, they are losing Hall is tough, but they are just low. They're so deep. That third ward defense, they can generate pressure. They go so deep on the defensive line. As you mentioned, Belk is a star. I love him. They did lose 2 corners to the NFL. But their backups, when they were in last year, when they were moving guys around, they looked okay. So I don't think there's going to be as big of a drop-off as, say, we'll see in Cincy. But it's definitely something to monitor. I lean the over here with Houston. I wish we had a little bit more than plus 200 to take them. But the schedule is certainly extremely favorable. As I mentioned, they only play, of those top 4 teams that we throw SMU in there, SMU on the road is the only team they play. They don't play any of the top 3 teams. So, yeah, if they get by UTSA in the opener, which I think they do, and they get revenge against Texas Tech, remember that they blew that game in the second half last year, there's a chance this team could go undefeated.
Ianniello, do you agree? Are you that bullish on Houston?
Yes and no. I'm not as bullish in those first 2 games, but I'm definitely bullish on them. I do agree with you. I don't love McCaskill getting hurt, but it's a running back. It puts a little more pressure on Clayton Tune, who I still get the willies with him a little bit. Jerry still is kind of reckless with fumbles. So I'm not super confident in him, but getting Nathaniel Dell back is huge. I actually found this interesting bet on DraftKings. I probably wouldn't take the over because we are high on UTSA. Obviously, Texas Tech beat them last year, and I do kind of like what they're doing. DraftKings has a really interesting bet that you can get conference wins. They have over 6.5 conference wins for Houston. The over's juiced to plus 160. So when you look at that schedule, as Stuckey mentioned, they avoid UCF, they avoid Houston, they avoid Cincinnati. So even if they do fall at SMU, you basically have a loss, 2-loss cushion in there, or 1-loss cushion in there if they do slip up in that AAC stretch. They ran the table in the AAC last year. So, even if Stuckey, if you guys are confident they're going to run the table, I'd rather get the plus 160 odds because they're certainly going to have to run the AAC to do that. So I really like that number versus, 8.5 is at FanDuel is juiced to minus 165. DraftKings has a 9 minus 120. So I do like that Houston over 6.5 conference wins. I love that plus 160 juice on that.
That is a great number. I think that's one I'm definitely going to play in lieu of playing them at 2-1, because 2-1 to win the conference, you can avoid all those teams in the regular season, but you're definitely going to play an elite team in the championship game. So I agree with you. I think that's great value. Turning to the third team here, Central Florida sitting at 8.5 for their win total. Over, you got to pay minus 130 to get that bet down. 7-2 to win the AAC. SP plus projection on offense, 48, 32nd on defense. And that defense is really what I've circled here and why I'm interested. Could be special by AAC standards. Their entire secondary is back from a 4-2-5 setup. They were 35th against the pass last year. They could be even better. On offense, there's just some questions in terms of who's going to be the quarterback. Mikey Keene was efficient instead of Dylan Gabriel when he went down 64% completions, 17 TDs, only 6 picks. But where does that leave John Reese Plumlee? Like, does he come in? Is he the better fit for this offense? They have an experienced backfield. They probably have 3 backs who could all start depending on the situation. Ryan O'Keefe at wide receiver, 3 starters on the line. Do you go boom or bust and go with the Ole Miss transfer here? Or do you stick with Mikey Keene and pair it with a quality defense and someone who's not going to turn the ball over that much? That's the question for Malzahn in this spot. And generally, it's hard to get a feel for what he's going to do because he's gone in both directions over the course of his career. He's gone for the playmaker in Nick Marshall, rode that all the way to national championship bid against Florida State. He's also gone with transfers like Jarrett Stidham, who were, more pocket passers. I'll start with you, Stuckey. Who do you think wins this quarterback battle, and how much does that impact how you play Central Florida, not just preseason, but also during the season?
Yeah, I really love this UCF team. You mentioned their defense. By some measures, they were a top 20 secondary last year, returning everybody. The defensive line is super deep. Their one weakness was at linebacker. They lose all their linebackers, but they got super talented transfers at linebacker. Offensive line, 130 starts, like 3 starters, 2 transfers that should start. I like everything about this team. Year 2 of Gus. It just feels like Plumlee fits a Gus Malzahn offense so much better, right? The dual threat and what Plumlee can do. Now, the quarterback position in question, how's he going to fit? How's Keene going to fare if it is him in year 2? I think I would rather go maybe to win the conference over their win total with quarterback questions, because it's kind of like higher ceiling, more variance with UCF. I just wish you were getting more than 3-1. Now they do, so I might just wait, play my spots, maybe play them at home against Cincinnati. Really tough place to play. And as we mentioned, of those top 3 or 4 teams, they play only 2 of them. Both of them are at home. So yeah, I really like this team. I'm been searching for a number. 3-1, it feels about right. But I think Plumlee is the best fit here. And as you mentioned, the defense.
Whether it's Plumlee or in on Malzahn here. Also, I'll throw in the bounce house. So in terms of schedule benefits to the way the schedule is laid out, Ianniello.
Yeah, I love this UCF team. If you guys listen to our draft we did earlier in the year, very high in that. I think I honestly conference. I say that they go Plumlee, but I almost kind of hope they go Keene, to be honest with you. They dropped that bad game early, which is his first start, but he didn't throw a pick the last 5 games of the year, really started to settle in. We mentioned they bring back Isaiah Bowser, who's had injury issues, but Johnny Richardson really came on when he got hurt last year. Leading receiver Ryan O'Keefe is back. They did lose Jalen Robinson to the portal late. I think he transferred in the spring, which did kind of suck. But they bring in Kobe Hudson, who was Auburn's leading receiver last year. They bring in tight end Kenmore Gamble, who was 3rd on Florida. He led Florida in receiving touchdowns last year. So those are 2, sometimes you hear those SEC transfers, it's like, well, they didn't make the target. They didn't get on the field. Like, these are leading receivers in the SEC. Stuckey mentioned the defense, how good it was last year. This is another one where they bring in a ton transfers there. They bring in, 2 FCS All-Americans, Kobe Perry at safety and Jason Johnson at linebacker. So they kind of did help shore up some of those holes. They do lose Big Cat Bryant up front, but I think their secondary is good enough to kind of withstand that loss. And you guys mentioned it. They get Houston and Cincinnati at home. You throw out that 2020 COVID season where, fans weren't in attendance. They haven't lost a game at home since 2016. So getting those 2 games at home, they have a really easy non-con. Well, not really easy, but, they play South Carolina State to start the year. Yeah, they play Louisville, but they get them at home too. And then they go at FAU, who, as we talked about last week, isn't exactly the most scary team. So I actually do like the over 8.5. I bet that a couple weeks ago when it was even money. It's juiced a little bit, but I would still probably take it. And then I do like them to win the conference because, like I said, I think they do. This is one of those another spots where it is very, very key to shop around because at FanDuel, they are the favorite to win the conference at plus 210. But at DraftKings, they have the third odds. They're plus 320 at DraftKings. So that's a pretty big difference. And yeah, like I said, if you're getting them the favorite at one book and the third best at another, so I would go ahead and jump on them at DraftKings.
320.
I'm really
I
high.
would hit 320. I would hit. This team, like for year one of Gus last year, a lot of bad injury luck. I mean, look, that Gabriel got hurt, throwing a freshman into the fire. They had a lot of injuries across the roster, but then if you look how they finished, a lot of momentum coming in this year. I think they finished 6-1, including a bowl win over Florida. So yeah, and I love some of the transfers they brought in. I agree. I'm really high on this team as you are.
I think we're all in agreement there. We'll turn to a team that potentially could be more divisive, and that's SMU. Sitting at 7 wins, new head coach Rhett Lashley comes in here. Looking at the rest of their numbers, 12-1 to win the conference, 17 projected S&P plus offense, 62nd defense. Mordecai returns to pair up with Lashley. Lashley led an amazing offense top. So offensively, even though they back Rice at wide receiver, they bring in transfer 5-star from Alabama as a running back who can replace Bentley, who I believe is off. He's a big play threat, but the defense, they weren't very good last year for starters. They only returned 3 from that unit. Could be even worse this season under Scott Simmons. And when you look at the schedule, kind of a little bit sneaky difficult in the first month. These are all the games, and the clocks were first at North Texas, home against TCU. As it relates to the win total, that is leading me in the direction of under. I do like Mordecai. I like what they've been able to do offensively, but I think they're going to be in a lot of shootouts. And when I look at a game like at Maryland's, if that's the swing game for the season, I don't feel great about them getting any stops against Tagovailoa. So I'm going to go ahead with under as my play here. And I don't buy them as being a fringe, top, throwing in quotes, the top 4 for the AAC. I think this is a 3-horse race at the top. So I don't see the Mustangs there. I'll start this time with Ianniello. What are your thoughts on SMU trying to replace some pieces and really rework a defense that let them down in big spots last year?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think it's a 3-team race. I think there's a bigger gap there. But I'm not as down on them as you are. I actually lean over. I'm not playing it. But I do. Mordecai, there's actually Stone is pressing Mordecai for the job. The AC's leading passer on his own team next year. That's a good sign because if he loses that job, that means, Stone must have been absolutely balling out. They bring back Rashee Rice. They get Joshua Moore transferring from Texas. They get Bo Corrales from North Carolina. So they do have talent. You mentioned the running back. I'm with you. The schedule and the defense didn't really do anything different to make me believe that they're going to take a big step forward. Like you said, they bring in Scott Simmons, was Liberty's defensive coordinator, but I'm just not totally turn the defense. I really like the hire of Rhett Lashley. I actually read something about that said, if Rhett Lashley wouldn't have been that surprised, or got that SMU job is a pretty good hire. Obviously, he was their former offensive coordinator. So I actually lean to the over, but I'm not going to play it. I'm staying away.
What do you think, Stuckey?
Yeah, really high variance team here, so I can see it going either way. I mean, the hope with Simons is that he's going to come in with a new scheme that generates a lot more pressure. I think they had like a 3.3% sack rate last year. They couldn't get any pressure. So your hope is that schematically they can generate more, which will help fix some of the problems. But the defense is certainly a concern. They lose, a couple stud wide receivers and a tight end, but they reloaded in that aspect. The offense should be absolutely electric again. But they brought in 15 Power 5 transfers. They had, I think, about 120 total starts via the transfer portal. So it's like, how are they all going to fit together? You also have a new defensive coordinator, new head coach is going to be calling plays. So a lot of moving pieces here. And they're very transfer reliant. So, yeah, I don't really love this schedule. You do get Cincy at home, but Cincy's coming off of a bye. You get TCU at home in the non-con, but they're coming off of a bye. So little things like that make it a little sneaky tough. They go to UCF. They also host Houston and Memphis. So it's a pretty tough schedule. They go to Maryland. I think that this is a stay away team from a betting perspective before the year. Unless you just absolutely love everything that they are and then they win the conference. I think let's see how things shake out early in the non-con and then play them on a game-to-game basis. So I'm staying away from SMU preseason.
Let's take a look at a team depending on the book. I'm sure Ianniello can drop in. He's our reads if there's a difference between FanDuel and DraftKings. Either 7 or 7.5 for Memphis's win to win the AAC. Offense projected by SP plus 52nd, 67th on the defensive side of the ball. Listen, the playmakers are back in the backfield. You get Seth Hennigan off of a promising, season as a first-year starter. Clark, Brandon Thomas. They bring in Javon Ducker from NIU at running back, so that's a really deep running back room. But the headline here: no Calvin Austin III to spark those big plays. He did it, taking short passes long, doing things on special teams. He's gone. 3 new offensive line starters, and only 2 back from a defense that was not all that good last year, particularly against the pass, 103rd in terms of passing yardage allowed last season. And they start at Mississippi State. So not a great time to be licking your wounds in the secondary. The rest of the schedule,
Miss State trying with revenge too from a ridiculous loss last year. I'm sure they're going to be out for blood.
So this is maybe one of the teams I serve best friends, just betting a lot of overs with this team because given everything that they have back, if they can, not necessarily with a single player, but if they can piece it together and try to replace some of the big plays from Calvin Austin, I think this could be, a top 30 offense, but the defense could easily be in the 100s. I was shocked to see 67 attached to them in SP plus. I don't necessarily see that. Matt Barnes in a defensive coordinator, maybe he works some kind of magic, but I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of who this Memphis team is. I think they're going to play some entertaining games throughout the season, and they play Arkansas State at home. They get North Texas at home in the non-conference. There's going to be some high-scoring games. There's going to be some good feelings, but I do not see them even flirting with being a top 2 team in the title game. So the 15-1's a not. Where are you on Memphis? This is like kind of a team and a Silverfield who's been treading water since their Cotton Bowl berth against Penn State, and they've clearly not been able to get back to those heights. But it should be a program that, at least from a recruiting standpoint, they're geographically ideally located. They've been working their way up and have established themselves really in the last 5 to 10 years. First under Fuente, as a program to be respected. Where do you see them in maybe a transition year? It could either go up or down. They could go in a different direction at head coach.
Yeah, I think the number's right. I mean, I project them right around 7.5, and I think they're going to be in a lot of close games again. I think they went 4-4 in one possession games last year, and you can see a lot of these games like at ECU, at Tulane, home against Houston, home against UCF. Like just going down, you could see all these games being one possession. So yeah, I mean, I'm worried about the defense. They have new coordinators too. So, and the one thing I'll caution you about with the overs is they did start to play slower at the end of last year. But you have a new offensive coordinator, new defensive man front. I'm really worried about the defensive line. They also lose an all-conference linebacker, and just the loss of Austin is massive from a big play perspective. He was just in a walking explosive play. So they've been bowl eligible 8 straight years, but I think they're kind of trending a little bit down. But like I said, I project this spot on, and so I have no interest in Memphis. Mike.
The next team I'd like to discuss is kind of a good reminder that you need to emotionally divorce two things: how you feel about a team playing on a neutral field against any opponent and how you evaluate them in their power rankings. And on the other side, what does their schedule actually look like? East Carolina is set at 6.5 for their is minus 120, 25. SP Plus doesn't particularly like them on either side of the ball, 75th on offense, 79th on defense. I think they're undervalued offensively. Listen, they won 4 or 5 down the stretch last year. Holden Ahlers has started 37 games. I know he's a high variance guy. When he's locked in, he can make plays to win. He can also turn the ball over and have accuracy issues and kind of throw you out of games. But he's not a one-man show. He's got Keaton Mitchell, one of the best freshman running backs in the country last year, 3 starters on the offensive line. It's a mystery right now with CJ Johnson at wide receiver. He's suspended. How long is he suspended? He's still on the roster. So who knows how much he plays there.
Too. He's practicing.
Yeah, he's back at practice.
He's practicing. And then also you look at all the wide receivers they're bringing in. They bring in Isaiah Winstead from Toledo, Jarrett Garner from Duke. They get a big Georgia transfer in Jalen Johnson. He'll be a starter at wideout. So I'm not concerned offensively. I think 75th is way off top 50 offense. They have good experience in the green secondary, but here we go. Here's 4 games seem pretty manageable. NC State lost, but then Old Dominion, Campbell. But when you look at the back, pure nightmare fuel. Starting on October, UCF at home, at BYU, at Cincinnati, Houston, all in a 5-week span. That's enough for me to just, it's a stay away because I really like this Pirate team. But 6.5, I struggle to see them getting there without, at least upsetting one of those teams. And the fact that, they gave BYU a good game last year, but they're at BYU this year, I just don't see it. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on the Pirates. Ianniello, what are your thoughts on a team that I'll at least speak for you on this one? I feel like we both want them to break through and to get some bigger wins, and we like Mike Houston as a head coach, but I don't know if it's setting up for a good year on the high seas for the Pirates.
I want them to be good so badly. Holden Ahlers is like my little puppy who he's so cute. I love him so much, but he just will not stop peeing in the house. No matter how hard we try to get him to be a good dog, he just doesn't get better. He was so promising as a sophomore, 29 touchdowns, 10 picks. All right. He comes back last year, 18 touchdowns, 9 picks, or 2020. Then last year, 18 touchdowns again, 10 picks. He just doesn't, we're still waiting for him to take that massive step forward, and he just doesn't do it. The other thing that was frustrating about ECU last year is you mentioned Mitchell and Raji Harris. These are 2 guys that Raji Harris was an all AAC in 2020. Mitchell was in 2021. 2 all AAC running backs, yet they finished 63rd in the country in rushing. Why?
OC, offensive coordinator stinks.
Yeah, give these 2 studs the ball every game, every play, and then you have Ahlers. It's like their offense. I agree with you, Breeze. I think they're undervalued, but they should be even better than they are. And it's so frustrating to watch them because they have so many weapons and so much talent, and they just do dumb things at the worst possible time. The defense, it does need to be better, especially against the pass. They lose Jaquan McMillan, who's one of the best, defenders in the conference. That's a huge loss for them. The one thing I do like about their schedule is this is the first time they have 7 home games since 2018. So that is a nice break. They have a great fan base down there. So I do expect, Daddy Finkel Stadium to be rocking. But I'm with you where I'm staying away because I just know if I invest in this team, I'm going to get frustrated. And like you mentioned, they're going to have 6 wins by Halloween to hit this win total. So I can't do it.
What are your thoughts, Stuckey?
Yeah, they're a weird team. They're going to play a lot. They played a lot of close games last year, and they're over the last couple of years with Ahlers. They're going to pull off a big upset in one of those games, but then they're also going to lose to someone that they shouldn't.
They're going to lose to Navy at home.
And I am worried about their secondary. McMillan I think by PFF had him as the highest graded corner in all of college football last year. Big loss. I am worried about their secondary, but then I look at their schedule and I'm like, they play, here's the teams like NC State, ODU, Campbell, Navy, USF, Tulane, Memphis. I mean, say UCF has Plumlee, BYU, since these receivers aren't great, Temple. I'm not, if you look at their schedule, it's you're not going to face a ton of prolific passing attacks. But I am worried about their defense overall. I think their offensive coordinator is just bad, is what it comes down to when you look at some of the pieces. So, yeah, I project them right around 6, and I think they'll probably end up finishing 6-6. But I think it all comes down to the week 1. I think there's a good chance they can upset NC State. And if they do, it's like all the momentum from that win, as long as they don't, celebrate too hard, lose to Old Dominion the next week at home, that the momentum from that win could send this team to the moon. A bad loss, like things could get ugly. But look, these two teams hate each other. These two fan bases hate each other. Greenville, and that's Saturday. NC State, with all this hype they're trying to deal with, have to go on the road to open the season. They're 10.5 point favorites. I'm playing ECU plus 10.5 week 1. I'll tell you that. And I think that game really determines the path of the Pirates this year. And that one should be fun. Home team past 20 years or so has dominated that series.
Far be it from NC State to have a huge letdown with huge expectations on their shoulders. I agree. I think that the fans are going to be lit up for that one. They're going to spend all morning at Sup Dogs getting fueled up for the game. So, yeah, we're all pulling for ECU. I just don't see it based on their schedule. All right, I'm going to bundle together the next two teams, not because their names are pretty close and their projected wins, but we're going to talk Tulane and Tulsa as a 2-pack here. So Tulane projected 6 wins, 50-1 to win the AAC, 41st on defense, 95th on 41st on offense, 95th on defense. I think you can make a claim that Hurricane Ida really threw a monkey wrench into this program last year. I understand that, it threw them off for like a 10-day period, and they end up going 2-10 on the whole season. But listen, there was hope when they almost upset Oklahoma and then everything fell apart. But what they did in the offseason is what I want to see from a program that under Willie Fritz has actually been, a pretty solid program, someone that you can rely on to get to that, 6-win threshold. He brought in 6 new coaches. He's not going to sit on his hands in the spot. He brings Michael Pratt back at quarterback, 4 starters on the offensive line. Ty J. Spears is finally back healthy. He came back at the end of last year and blew up. The defense was awful to start the season, but then borderline good down the stretch. They allowed 354 total yards and 22 points per game in their last 5. I love their linebacking core, Nick Anderson and Dorian Williams. The schedule at the beginning kind of sets up for some nice momentum with UMass and Alcorn. So I'm buying on the Golden Hurricane. I'm buying on the Green Wave in this spot. Turning my attention to the Golden Hurricane, 5.5 wins for their win total, 25-1 to win the AAC, 80th on offense, 73rd on defense, and S&P plus projection. They're still playing the 3-3-5, but Joe Gillespie is gone. He's off to TCU as defensive coordinator. That's what made this team special. That's what made them a difficult out every single game in conference play. 9 new starters on that defensive side of the ball. Green offensive line. No more Shamari Brooks. I think the way that I'm going to play this is I'm not going to have a preseason play on Tulsa, but I'm going to look for them to get a hot start because their schedule is so favorable early on. At Wyoming, the Pokes are a mess right now. Northern Illinois at home, if they can steal a win there and then beat Jacksonville State the following week, I think they'll be overly inflated in terms of public perception. And looking back on how they played the last 3 or 4 years, that's when I'm going to fade Tulsa. So I'll pitch it to both of you guys, Tulane and Tulsa as a 2-pack. Are you buying both? Are you selling both? Or is it a mixed bag? Ianniello, how about you first?
I'm with you. I'm way higher on Tulane. I really like their over, and then I also lean the Tulsa under. And for me, like you said, they are similar. It really comes down to, as you mentioned, is what both teams have done with the coordinator position. With Tulsa losing their DC, I actually really like the OC Tulane brought in, Jim Svoboda. I know, Breeze, you love the Division II and FCS coaches coming up. He's been the head coach at Central Missouri for 12 years. So really experienced coach taking over. And like you mentioned it with Willie Fritz, they gassed every single offensive assistant except for the tight ends coach. So I love when, that kind of accountability. The Oklahoma game, Michael Pratt hurt his shoulder in that game, and he was hurt pretty much the entire season. And I think it showed. And he was so good as a freshman. He led all freshmen in touchdowns, 1,800 yards, 20 touchdowns. Ran for 8 in 2020, really lost that rushing ability last year. I think his injury was a big part of that. And that when you look at these two teams, the quarterback's difference to me. I'm very, very high on Michael Pratt, and Davis Brin stinks. He led the entire country in interceptions. He's the only Tulsa quarterback who attempted a pass last year. So he's there. All they have no depth behind him. If he gets hurt, they're screwed. So other than Tulsa, other than Juan Carlos Santana, who's about one of the funner names in college football, there's not a whole about this Tulsa team that I like. So I'm much higher on Tulane. I was actually trying to find DraftKings has head-to-head win total bets. And I was really hoping they would give me Tulane over Tulsa. They did not, but if I could find that, I would definitely bet that one. Tulane has a lot of wide receiver depth. They bring back Tajay Spears. I'm going high on the green wave as well. Ride the wave.
Yeah, I agree. These are my two bets so far in the AAC are Tulane over 6 plus 110 and Tulsa under 6. You can still find a minus 120 out there. There's a lot of correlations. They play each other. The game is at Tulsa, but Tulane is coming off of a bye before that game. Revenge for last year. I had Tulane. They missed a 24-yard field goal to win the game and then lost in overtime. Infuriating. But if you look at Tulane last year, just horrendous luck. You mentioned Hurricane Ida. They had to move to Birmingham for a month. Also, the game against Oklahoma, which they almost won, was supposed to be in New Orleans. That got moved to Norman. Got moved to a true road game. Also, here were the first 8 FBS teams that they played. Oklahoma, Ole Miss, UAB, Houston, SMU, UCF, Cincy, and ECU. Just one of the hardest schedules I've ever seen for a group of 5 team to start the year. I think that caught up to them. They also were dealing with the hurricane. Terrible turnover luck. If you look at their interceptions, projected interceptions versus actual, so 0-5 in one possession games, so many positive regression signs for this team. There was also rumors that the offense hated Chip Long, morale issues, locker room problems. So I love that they got rid of him, brought in Svoboda, who actually took over as the head coach of Central Missouri after Fritz left back in 2010. I think he's going to bring some West Coast principles to this spread option offense, get rid of the ball quicker, which I think was one issue that Pratt has. But then his offense has always had a lot of explosiveness. So I think the offense is going to get a huge bump for him. And then if you look at the schedule, yes, they go to Houston and to Cincy, but those are probably losses anyway. So they're on the road. A fair assumption is they start 3-1 out of conference. But at Kansas State is not winnable. But let's say they're 3-3 in those 6 games. Their other 6, 4 at home, 2 on the road. The 2 road games are at Tulsa, who we're low on, and at USF. And then, the 4 home games, out of those 6, I've been favored in 4, and then the other 2 true coin flips. So getting over 6 at plus money, I love. I love a lot of things about this Tulane team. And then Tulsa, I agree with you guys. The loss, just like how much I love the offensive coordinator coming in for Tulane, the loss of the defensive coordinator, Gillespie, for Tulsa is massive. I think he's one of the best defensive coordinators in college football. So underrated. And then their defense just lost a ton. I mean, especially losing Player. That's just a massive loss. Him and Stevenson in the middle. That 3-3-5, those 2 defensive tackles up front did so much for that defense. Now you have inexperienced secondary. You lose 2 tackles to the NFL. A lot I don't like about this Tulsa team. And I don't like their schedule. If you look at some of the spots on their schedule, they play the 2 worst teams in the AAC, but they both come on the road. And they only have 1 or 2 locks on the schedule. Even at Wyoming, the market, it's like a pick, that game. So I don't really look at the schedule like some of the nuances of it. So love the under on Tulsa. Love the – I think Tulane picks them off at Tulsa, and that will do wonders for both win totals. So I know there's some correlation there. But buying the green wave, fading the Golden Hurricane.
All right. Bundling those 2 together seem to bring out some spicy takes from you 2 guys. I believe the 3 of us are all in agreement in terms of playing the over on Tulane and the under on Tulsa. Let's see if we can do the same with this 2-pack. Both sitting at 4.5 wins as their win total. 50-1 for South Florida win the AAC, 100-1 for Navy. We'll start with USF, 68th in projected SP plus offense, 106th defense. This is make or break time for Jeff Scott. The former Clemson OC is 3-18 in 2 years, but this offense could pop, at least, by recent standards in 2022. If Timmy McClain ends up, taking a stranglehold of this job and gets a little more accurate, he could be a very fun dual threat. They have 9 starters back on offense. They bring in 2 P5 wide receiver transfers in Brown from North Carolina and Joe from Clemson. And their defense, the 4-2-5 look, the entire back 7 returns with a new defensive coordinator, Bob Shoop, a former Broyles Award finalist. He has to create more havoc. They were 125th in tackles for loss last year. They can't get away with that. The schedule's not doing many favors. BYU at Florida at Louisville, but 4.5. I'm bullish on the Bulls. I'm going to go over USF 4.5. Navy, same number, 100-1 to win the AAC, 122nd on the offensive side of the ball, 89th defensively. Ken Niumatalolo, listen, the guy has been a legend in Annapolis. 2015 to 2019, they go 41-25, 3-1. The last 2 years, it got kicked off. COVID game in the empty stadium against BYU. Anybody, they had spent the whole fall camp without contact, how to navigate the protocols and everything else. They've been digging out of that ever since. 7-15 across the last 2 seasons. The offense, he has experience. They get the boost emotionally from beating Army in that awesome finale. 2 seniors, 2 juniors return on the offensive line. Diego Fago is gone, which is sad, in terms of everything he meant to the program on that side of the ball. But they do bring back 6 defenders. Bajan Nichols is an awesome kicker. He's a nice plus in some close games. And the season can get started in a positive way with Delaware and Memphis at home back-to-back. That Memphis game, I think they'll be an underdog in, but I wouldn't be shocked if they could run right through around by a Tigers defense that struggles. But they do draw at Air Force, at UCF, at SMU, Cincy at home, at Houston, Notre Dame. Just the hits just keep on coming. So because of that, it's a stay away for me at 4.5, just because of so many challenging road games against quality opponents. But I'm a little bit more optimistic than I was at midseason last year when it looked like it could be the ends of the era there in Annapolis. So what are your thoughts on these 2 teams, South Florida and Navy? I'll start with you, Stuckey.
Yeah, South Florida, look, one of the most experienced teams in the country. I think they crushed the portal. It's just hard to find wins. Like, what do they have? They were 0-3 in 1-possession games last year, and this is the year, like you said, for Jeff Scott. What do they have? 1 free win on their. They got to go to Temple. 1 free win is Howard at home on their schedule. The one thing that I'll mention is that week 1 game against BYU. I think people are like, oh, this line looks so low. Humidity on September 1st in Tampa against a team not used to it. It could be a massive edge for South Florida. I think the last time BYU went to USF was 3 years ago, and it was, what's his name? Jaron Hall's first start, actually, in college football, and USF pulled off the upset. It was like 95% humidity that day, and they had a big comeback. The 2 huge touchdown drives at the end of the game when BYU wore down. So just throwing it out there. I don't know. I think the number's about right on USF. And then with Navy, I hate playing Service Academy win totals because they play each other, and then they're kind of like, no matter how good or bad they are, they're always kind of equal because they understand the scheme so well. And, those games a lot of times can go either way. Who's running the ball for Navy, by the way? Their leading returning rusher is the receiver. The best, and you can't really look at returning production on their offensive lines for Service Academies. They always just reload and doesn't really matter. But the running, look, this team has just gone like this. It's just on a downward trajectory ever since they lost Malcolm Perry, who recently retired. What a legend. And I have a lot of questions about Navy. They only have 5 home games. And also something that I will mention, I don't have a play on either of these 2 teams. It's just hard to find enough wins on their schedules. Cut block rule for Service Academy teams this year. How much does that impact their offenses? It's TBD. How much is it going to be enforced? We don't know. Is it just going to be like, hey, we're going to throw the flag on this a couple times early in the season and then forget about it? Or it's like constant. And then here's the thing, like, you can't get behind the sticks if your drive is over. So if you're throwing 2 of these flags on the new cut block rule a game and you're ruining 2 drives, it's massive, but we don't know how much. But that's something that could really hinder Navy this year with all brand new running backs.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about Navy. They lose their top 3 leading rushers from last year. I'm not high on them. I just don't. They were so bad last year. And you look at the team that all they do is run the ball. They were 106th in the country in rushing success rate. So When that's all you do and you don't do it well, that's a huge problem. This South Florida number makes me so angry because I love this team. And that number is ridiculous. Like Stuck said, where are 5 wins on this schedule? We mentioned it with Tulane and stuff is you actually want to get Cincinnati and Houston on the road. You don't want to waste home games on games you're not going to win. And while they do get those on the road, other than Howard, their other 2 most winnable games are at Temple and at Tulsa. So the fact that they have to go on their road to both of them, their home games, UCF, SMU, like those are still tough games. Tulane, East Carolina, can they maybe pull off one of those? Sure. But then at Florida, at Louisville, if they can maybe flip BYU, but I don't, they're not getting a 5. How many games are they going to be favored in? 1, maybe 2. Maybe they get, maybe they're probably favored at Temple. At Tulsa is probably close. So you're going to be favoring 2 games at the most. So to have to pull off 3 to 4 upsets is just too much to ask. But from a week to week standpoint, they bring back their quarterback who probably won't even win the job because Jerry Bohannon transferred him from Baylor. So they have literally the Big 12's winning quarterback there. They bring back the running backs. They bring back their receivers. They bring back all 5 offensive linemen. Joe transfers in from Clemson. They return Brian Batty, their stud kick returner, who I do hope they get him the ball more on offense than they did last year. They finished 123rd in defense last year, which is obviously an issue, but they bring back their entire secondary. They bring back all their linebackers. You mentioned they have new OC Bob Shoop, who's former DC for Vanderbilt, Penn State, Tennessee, Mississippi State. He's been an SEC Big Ten defensive coordinator. And Stuck mentioned it, their biggest issue was they didn't get pressure and tackles for loss. Well, I read this quote from Bob Shoop, and I was ready to run through a wall. He said it's going to be a full court press for 60 minutes from the first snap to the last snap of the game. Fire me up, baby. I love the Bulls. I'm all in on this team, but I just can't find 5 wins. I'm desperately trying to find them. When I was doing all my research, I was locked and loaded to take their over. And I pulled up the books expecting, to get a 3.5, and I get 4.5. And I just cannot find this number no matter how hard I try. So I am high on the Bulls. I think they're, again, one of those teams that they're going to be significantly better in a power rating standpoint, but it probably won't reflect in their win total as much as we'd hope.
Speaking of trying to fire up a fan base and players with some, bulletin board, rah material, Temple is going to need a lot of that. We're rounding out the 11-team AAC. We'll make this quick. 2.5 for their win total. Juice minus 140 to the over. And when you go through their schedule, you get it. They open at Duke, home against Lafayette, home against Rutgers, home against UMass. So they should be in those games, hypothetically, although offensively, SP Plus has them 125th on offense, 100 on defense. Sean Drayton, as a new head coach, the cupboard isn't completely bare, although I don't like DeJuan Mathis. He looked totally overwhelmed last season. They got drilled in 7 straight losses to end the year. Darvon Hubbard, maybe the only one to keep an eye on in terms of production. He comes in, he had originally signed with Texas A&M. He could be a big-bodied physical runner for them. But this team, I'm in full wait-and-see mode. I'm not going to play them on the over here, certainly. And then, if it was a feisty FCS team and not Lafayette, who's kind of a middling Patriot League team, I'd probably take a flyer on a money line upset there. But this schedule, I think, could produce some fool's gold in the month of September. And then when they get into AAC play in October, going to just go back to the well and start picking against the Owls here. Anything that I'm missing on this? Is there any reason schematically or personnel or schedule that would lead you in either direction on the win total, Stuckey?
I mean, they probably should start 2-2 with wins over Lafayette and UMass at home. But then where's the third win come from? I mean, you got USF at home maybe, but they're gonna. So you're probably just waiting all year to try and rooting for that. Maybe ECU at the end of the year. Just stay away from me. I think the numbers. But they needed the coaching change. Carey needed to go. But they're learning another new defense. It's the 6th head coach in 7 years. The roster is void of talent. They lost their last 7 games by 35 points on average. At that schedule, look, there's 3 potential wins here that you could see easily. But that's about it. So I think they're either going to win 2 or 3 games. So I think the number is priced about right. No thanks on Temple.
Yeah, this is another team where the schedule, the opposite of South Florida, the schedule does them favors where they probably have the skill level that they should be a winless team, but they get like Stuck said, Lafayette, they get UMass. UMass probably the worst, team in the country. They also get, not that I think they're going to win them, but Duke and Rutgers are probably the two of the three worst Power 5 teams in the country. They do get South Florida. They do get Navy, the two other worst teams in this conference. But they're just going to be really bad again. I'm with you, Breeze. I do not believe in Mathis whatsoever. You look at their coordinator changes they made. They bring in the new head coach who was Texas running back coach last year. Okay, I don't really know much about him, to be honest. But their new offensive coordinator, Danny Langsdorf, was the Colorado passing game coordinator last year. Colorado was 127th in the country in passing success. They bring in new defensive coordinator, DJ Elliott. He was the DC for Kansas. Kansas was 129th in the defensive success rate. So they essentially hired the two people in the country who were worse at the jobs than the ones they replaced. So it's not like either one of those are even inspiring a little bit of confidence. So Temple's going to be horrible, but their schedule isn't that do or die.
We'll end with some positivity here with a lightning round, our favorite win total and our pick to win the AAC. I'm going to go ahead with the Tulane Green Wave. I think they get it all back together this year. Michael Pratt's healthy, new offensive system, new play caller. Ty J. Spears, if he is the player that he was when he came back for that one game last year, this offense is going to be exciting. I know the schedule has, some thorny spots, but I'm going to go over 6. And then Houston 2-1 to win the AAC. I think it's their time. This will be the coronation for Doug Belk. He'll carry him off the field, Buddy Ryan style, and then he'll get a head coaching job of his own. How about you, Stuckey? What's your favorite win total and play to win the AAC in 2022?
Yeah, Tulane over, Tulsa under. Both at 6. Get the 6. I'd pay for the 6s that are out there. Always shop, find the best number. But yeah, I think the offensive coordinator coming in, positive regression for Tulane. The loss of the defensive coordinator for Tulsa, just massive. There's a lot not to like about Tulsa's defense, and then losing 2 tackles in the offensive line. I'll say UCF ends up winning. Try to plus 320 you can find out there. Do you want to get crazy? Throw some couch change on Tulane to win the conference.
Yeah, I'm double dipping with the Knights. My favorite win total is the UCF over 8.5. And I like the UCF plus 320 to win the conference. Although I do really like that Houston over 6.5 conference wins with the plus 160 juice. I think that's a much better bet than taking their over.
For Mike Ianniello and Stuckey, I'm Mike Calabrese. This has been the Big Bets on Campus podcast, the Group of 5 deep dive. The Action Network's been churning out all kinds of college football preseason content, both written and audio. So make sure to check all that out. We're going to be back next, rounding out the G5 preview series with the Max. Stuckey will be back for that as well. So please keep an eye on everything that we're working on here to help you get off to a hot start in September. Thanks so much for listening.